The roar of 764 construction machines lined up across a dusty field in Burkina Faso was not just the sound of engines starting, it was the sound of a nation declaring that it would build its own future. Bulldozers, trucks, mixers, cranes, and mobile projectors stood like soldiers ready for battle, waiting to be deployed into towns and villages that had too long been left behind. On September 12, 2025, President Ibrahim Traoré handed these machines to 4 regional brigades, transforming what could have been a simple delivery into a historic milestone. But this wasn't just about machines. It was about a vision. Traoré told the crowd that no revolution can survive unless the people themselves take part. Roads built by the state alone, he reminded them, can quickly crumble or even be destroyed when citizens feel no ownership. But when ordinary men and women are involved in the design, construction, and maintenance, then those roads become more than asphalt. They become symbols of national pride and unity. This is why the infrastructure revolution matters. It is not a gift from the government to the people, but an invitation for the people to step forward as builders of their own destiny. For the first time in Burkina Faso's history, infrastructure is no longer just a government project. It is a people's project. So here is the question we must ask. Could this be the model that finally breaks Africa's dependency on outside loans and contractors? Could this be the beginning of a continental awakening where citizens themselves lay the foundations of sovereignty? If you believe that this story deserves to be heard, stay with us until the end. And please share this video if you feel you are among the first to witness and support President Ibrahim Traoré's bold vision. Subscribe if you believe that truth is more important than headlines, because together we are writing a new chapter, not only for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as a whole. The morning of September 12, 2025 will be remembered as more than just another day in Ouagadougou. Under a blazing Sahel sun, the air was charged with expectation as citizens gathered to witness what the presidency called the second wave of the Faso MBO initiative. Lined up on the grounds were 764 machines, towering cranes, earth movers, trucks, concrete mixers, water tankers, and even mobile projectors. They gleamed under the light not as foreign donations marked by flags of another nation, but as tools claimed by Burkina Faso, itself destined to be used by its own brigades of builders. President Ibrahim Traoré stood before coordinators, regional directors, engineers, and ordinary citizens. His words carried the weight of both command and conviction. There is no revolution that can survive unless the masses are involved. This was not a ceremonial speech designed for applause. It was a challenge to every listener that the success or failure of this revolution in infrastructure would depend not on him alone, nor even on the brigades, but on the people themselves. The machines were not being delivered to private companies nor contracted out to international firms with years of delay and hidden fees. Instead, they were entrusted to 4 new brigades stationed in the regions of Yad-Kawese-Gulmu and Bankui. Each brigade would be responsible not just for operating equipment, but for mobilizing communities. In fact, Traoré had pledged that every region in Burkina Faso would one day host a road-building brigade. This was the second major delivery, and it confirmed in the words of his coordinators that the captain is a man of his word. The scene was carefully structured to show that this was not a top-down government gift, but a shared national mission. Traoré reminded the crowd that in the past, infrastructure projects had often failed because people saw them as distant, imposed by an anonymous state. Too often, citizens burned tires on newly built roads or neglected maintenance once the first cracks appeared. Today, he said, we want the people themselves to build these infrastructures and to maintain them. His point was clear: when people sweat to create something they protected, the machines themselves carried symbolism. A bulldozer clearing a path in the Sahel was not just carving a road, it was carving out sovereignty. A crane lifting concrete blocks was not only constructing bridges, but building trust between the government and its citizens. Each piece of equipment represented the shift from dependency to autonomy, from waiting for foreign aid to using local hands and minds. But the event was not just about lofty ideals. There was a detailed, practical plan attached to the delivery. The brigades would first prioritize logistical military routes, ensuring that frontline forces had the roads they needed to defend the country from insurgent threats. After securing these lifelines, the brigades would turn to intra-urban and inter-urban roads, linking towns and villages to markets, hospitals, and schools. In this way, infrastructure was framed not only as a path to development, but also as a shield for national security. Recruitment had already begun. In Bonongo, hundreds of young men were in training, preparing to join the brigades by the end of the month. Once deployed, they would use this wave of equipment to tackle the country's most urgent bottlenecks. The strategy was to start with 4 brigades, now then expand steadily until the entire country was covered. Coordinators in each region would not simply supervise, but actively collaborate with engineers, technicians, and local populations to ensure that projects moved quickly and efficiently. In total, the handover was designed to arm 4 brigades, but in reality it was arming an entire population with the tools of self-determination. The Faso MBO initiative, whose full name means Faso Mobilization for Building, was entering its decisive phase. What began with promises had now become a visible reality, hundreds of machines humming with power, waiting for the command to roll out. This was why September 12th felt so different. It was not just about hardware, it was about hearts. Every machine represented a choice to rely on the will of Burkina Faso rather than the will of outsiders. Every speech emphasized responsibility, not dependency, and every brigade symbolized the unity of soldier, engineer, and farmer working not for personal gain, but for collective survival. When the crowd dispersed that day, people were not only talking about the size of the machines or the logistics of deployment. They were talking about a revolution that had suddenly become tangible. For the first time, the people of Burkina Faso could point to concrete evidence of a government not only promising change, but delivering it piece by piece, road by road, machine by machine. The moment of delivery had passed, but what lingered in the air that day was not just the rumble of engines, it was the sharp turn in tone when President Ibrahim Traoré shifted from celebration to confrontation. His words pierced deeper than the sight of machines stacked like giants behind him. He reminded the nation of an uncomfortable truth. The state can build roads, but if the people are not involved, those roads will be burned, destroyed, and forgotten. That was the climax of his message. It was a blunt acknowledgement of the past, of tires set aflame on asphalt, of bridges left to crumble, of projects abandoned once ribbon-cutting ceremonies were over. And yet in that stark reminder was also the birth of something new. Traoré was not content to build with steel and cement alone. He was determined to build a new civic mentality. He was asking his people to transform themselves from passive recipients into active guardians of the revolution. This call struck a nerve because everyone in the crowd knew what he meant. Too many roads had been left cracked and impassable, too many villages cut off, too many farmers trapped by floods or dust because maintenance was somebody else's job. By placing the responsibility in the hands of ordinary citizens, Traoré was shifting the very foundation of governance. He was not promising to do everything for them, he was demanding they join him in doing it. The reaction was immediate. Coordinators standing beside the brigades nodded, visibly moved by the trust being placed upon them. Regional directors, often used to operating as bureaucrats, now felt the weight of being frontline mobilizers. Even the engineers, hardened by years of stalled projects and limited budgets, seemed to see in those 764 machines a chance to finally build without waiting for external contracts. Among ordinary citizens, the emotions were mixed but powerful. Some felt pride. Finally, a president was not speaking down to them, but calling them partners. Others felt the weight of responsibility. To be told, "You must change your mentality," is not a comfortable message. Yet it was precisely this discomfort that marked the speech's climax. Revolutions are not born from convenience. They are born when people are shaken into action. International observers, though not mentioned in the speech, also began to whisper about the implications. Development projects across Africa had long been dominated by Western aid agencies, Chinese contractors, or international NGOs. But here was a president telling his people that infrastructure could no longer be outsourced, it had to be owned by them. That defiance against the usual order of things carried its own shockwaves. Traoré's insistence on prioritizing logistical military routes only deepened the sense of urgency. He framed roads not merely as economic arteries, but as lifelines for soldiers defending the nation. This was not abstract. In the Sahel, where insurgent attacks often cut off entire towns, the ability to move troops and supplies quickly could mean the difference between survival and collapse. For the brigades, this directive transformed their mission from construction to national defense. As the president spoke, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. The machines behind him were more than equipment. They were weapons in a different kind of war, a war against isolation, dependency, and decay. Each engine was a drumbeat of defiance, each vehicle a declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer wait for permission to modernize. When the ceremony ended, conversations spread quickly through the streets. Citizens asked themselves, would they truly rise to this call? Would the youth, often the first to protest, become the first to protect new roads? Would villagers see maintenance not as a burden, but as a duty? These were not rhetorical questions. They were the heart of the revolution's survival. That day's climax was not a parade of machines. It was a challenge spoken with urgency: change your mentality. It was the kind of challenge that could divide a people or unite them more fiercely than ever before. In that sense, the delivery of 764 machines was only the beginning. The real battle was for the hearts and minds of the Burkina people, and the reactions showed that the message had landed exactly where Traoré intended, deep in the conscience of a nation ready to be tested. In the weeks that followed the September 12th handover, the consequences of President Ibrahim Traoré's initiative began to ripple across Burkina Faso. What had started as a speech and a lineup of machines quickly translated into visible shifts in daily life and political dynamics. The civil and political outcomes revealed just how deeply the infrastructure revolution could reshape not only roads, but relationships between the state, its citizens, and the wider region. On the civil side, the most immediate change was psychological. For years, people had grown used to watching governments or foreign contractors build roads that felt distant from their own lives. But when brigades composed of local youth began operating bulldozers and graders, villagers suddenly recognized their own faces behind the wheel. The sense of ownership was real. Farmers began discussing which feeder roads should be prioritized. Traders started calculating how much faster they could reach markets, and parents imagined their children walking to schools without wading through mud or dust. Infrastructure was no longer abstract. It was personal. This transformation also brought new forms of responsibility. Communities understood that if they had a hand in building the road, they could not afford to sabotage it later. The old image of burning tires on fresh asphalt seemed to fade into something almost unthinkable. Instead, local committees were quietly forming to monitor maintenance, with villagers volunteering to report damages and coordinate repairs. For the first time, the culture of destruction was being replaced by a culture of stewardship. The economic ripple effect soon followed. In regions where brigades began work, merchants reported lower transport costs. A truck carrying millet or cotton that once took days to reach an urban market could now make the trip in half the time. These seemingly small gains meant more money in the hands of rural families, who began to view the state not as a distant bureaucracy, but as an ally in their survival. Politically, the impact was even more profound. The initiative strengthened Traoré's legitimacy in ways no election or slogan could achieve. For decades, African leaders had promised development, but delivery was slow, tied up in contracts with foreign powers or drained by corruption. By contrast, here was a leader who did not wait for permission, who turned words into machines and machines into action. The message was unmistakable. Traoré was not simply managing the state, he was reshaping it. This shift carried implications for the balance of power within Burkina Faso itself. Local governors, often seen as powerless administrators, suddenly found themselves coordinating directly with brigades and communities. Regional directors tasked with supervising projects gained both prestige and accountability. Power was decentralizing in practice, even if not in law, as communities realized their role was central to the nation's success. Yet the most striking political outcome was the renewed bond between civilians and the military. For years, soldiers had been seen primarily as combatants in the Sahel's endless conflicts. But now, brigades part military, part civilian, were seen paving roads, connecting villages, and building markets. This dual image softened tensions and reframed the military as builders as well as protectors. It was a strategic move by tying infrastructure to defense. Traoré bound the fate of roads to the fate of the nation. Of course, challenges loomed. Some critics whispered that enthusiasm might fade once the novelty wore off, or that political opponents could exploit any delays to question Traoré's credibility. Others feared that international lenders, seeing Burkina Faso reduce its dependency, might retaliate with financial pressure. But for now, the momentum was undeniable. The civil and political consequences of the handover had set the country on a new trajectory. Burkina Faso was no longer waiting for roads to be built for it. It was building them itself physically, socially, and politically. And in doing so, it was rewriting the contract between state and citizen, turning infrastructure into a symbol of sovereignty and leadership, into a partnership rooted in shared responsibility. From Washington to Brussels, the September 12th ceremony in Burkina Faso did not go unnoticed. The images of 764 construction machines lined up behind President Ibrahim Traoré traveled across the world, and for foreign analysts, the meaning was as clear as it was unsettling. Here was a poor, landlocked African nation building with its own hands without waiting for the permission or financing of international lenders. For the United States, the development posed a quiet but significant challenge. American policymakers have long argued that African nations require external guidance, capital, and oversight to manage large-scale infrastructure projects. Yet Burkina Faso was presenting an alternative model, one where equipment was procured, brigades mobilized, and communities engaged without a single IMF loan or World Bank consultancy team in sight. To older observers in the U.S. who remember the Marshall Plan or the Interstate Highway Revolution, the echoes were unmistakable. Traoré was asking his people to do for themselves what Americans once did after World War II, build unity and strength through infrastructure. In Europe, the reactions were mixed. Some applauded the initiative as a bold experiment in self-reliance, while others worried it could further reduce the influence of European firms that have traditionally dominated Africa's construction sector. A French commentator noted bitterly that Burkina Faso had once relied on French companies for even the smallest projects, yet now was mobilizing its own brigades. To him, this was not just road building, it was decolonization in motion. Elsewhere in the global south, however, the symbolism was electrifying. Leaders in Mali and Niger, already aligned with Burkina Faso in the AS alliance, praised the initiative as proof that sovereignty could be practical, not just rhetorical. Across Africa, younger politicians began asking why their nations could not do the same. Why wait for loans that trap them in debt when communities themselves can be mobilized to build? The ripple effect was ideological as much as material. China and Russia, watching closely, interpreted the move differently. For Beijing, it was a signal that Africa might no longer accept the model of endless feasibility studies and delayed mega-projects. For Moscow, it was confirmation that Traoré's government was strengthening its internal legitimacy, making it a more stable partner in the emerging multipolar order. What struck international observers most, however, was Traoré's framing of roads as part of national defense. By prioritizing logistical military routes, he had tied infrastructure to survival in the fight against insurgencies. For the Pentagon, this was a sobering message. While the U.S. had spent billions on counterterrorism across the Sahel, Burkina Faso was demonstrating that something as simple as a functioning road could be more decisive than any foreign military base. For global audiences, the images of ordinary Burkinabés standing beside bulldozers and graders carried a universal resonance. They told a story not only of sovereignty but of dignity, of a people choosing to invest sweat instead of debt, community instead of dependency. To many older Americans watching from afar, it evoked a question they had not asked in years. Could it be that a small African nation has rediscovered something we ourselves have forgotten, that the strength of a nation lies not in what is borrowed, but in what is built together? In that sense, Burkina Faso's road revolution was not only a local event, it was a message to the world, a message that the age of waiting is over, and that Africa is ready to chart its own path, a mile by mile, road by road. September 12, 2025 may one day be remembered as the moment Burkina Faso redrew the map of its own future. Not with ink, not with signatures on foreign contracts, but with the roar of engines and the call of a leader who dared to place responsibility in the hands of his people. Yet, as inspiring as this vision is, it also comes with a warning. Revolutions are not sustained by ceremonies. They are sustained by discipline, by vigilance, and by the willingness of ordinary citizens to protect what they build. The machines will break down if they are not maintained. Roads will crumble if no one cares for them. And the spirit of unity can fracture if people fall back into old habits of passivity or sabotage. This is why President Ibrahim Traoré's challenge, "Change your mentality," is more than a slogan. It is a test. Not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as a whole. Because if this model succeeds, it could spread. From Mali to Niger, from Ghana to Congo, nations are watching to see if roads built by the people can outlast loans written by the IMF. And if it fails, critics will say Africa was never ready to stand on its own. That is the burden of this experiment. So we ask you, our viewers, do you believe President Ibrahim Traoré's strategy of people-led reform is strong enough to endure? Can this new chapter in Burkina Faso become the blueprint for Africa's future? Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to witness and support this vision. And subscribe if you believe, as we do, that truth matters more than headlines. Together, let us carry forward the spirit of unity, sovereignty, and the roads that will shape tomorrow.